All right. Welcome to the stream. Sorry about that. We are happy and excited to do this episode here. I got my friend Colton Carlson, and we are going to be discussing a few things that he brought up that he wanted to discuss. My name is Derek Morell. I'm with Irresistible Truth. And Colton, why don't you go ahead and give yourself a little introduction here?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me again. I feel like this is a common thing now.
Yeah,
which
number two.
is great. But So my name is Colton Carlson. I teach in Arizona, math and philosophy for high school students. So not too like difficult, but it's still pretty fun because teenagers are always fun. So teach that, and I've been getting into this debate with Stratton for the last year, ever since he released his video responses in response to Bignon's videos attacking him, Braxton, and Leighton Flowers. So he did that with Eli Ayala about last when the pandemic hit. So I started listening to all those videos, taking detailed notes, and I thought Tim wasn't really a great contender before listening to those videos against compatibilism. And then I started listening to those videos and I was like, wow, he actually may have a point here. I got to study this a little bit more. So I started studying really his articles like constantly all last summer. His book, I couldn't wait till it came out, right? So as soon as it came out, as soon as I had my personal money the next month, I bought the book, right? And I have it actually with me. And you can see I have done a lot of notes, on his book. I've probably read it multiple times, at least 3 to 5 times, I would say. His philosophical section, about maybe even more. I've read many of his articles, and I'm currently writing a huge response to this guy. A huge response. Right now it's about at 160 pages. So yeah, it just was going to be 20, and then it turned into 30, then it turned into like 70, and then I was like, I should just keep going, right?
So the point is, you're not just a guy that was talking with him in the Facebook comments a week ago and want to do a video. I mean, you've been following Dr. Stratton here, and
yes,
yeah.
That's been crazy. Yeah. So what I want to respond to is twofold. I want to respond to a short video, about 4 or 5 minute video that he posted on determinism and love. And I want to go through that. And then we also, he posted an article, which you have it in the link description, an article on mad scientists and EJOs and what's necessary for rational responsibility, and how determinism can't be underneath determinism, you can't be rationally responsible, and yada yada. Mm-hmm. So typical for Stratton, because that's his main argument, which is fine. But he posted that in a Facebook group, and I started commenting on it, and we got in this huge debate. And it kind of, I don't really like how things ended, because I do love the brother. I do see him as we're both Nebraskans. I love that, that we're both from Nebraska. So, and it's the good life, and we can bond over that. But there's some things that he says that I'm just like, where is he getting this? And I'm trying my best not to straw man him. And so we'll see that when we get to the thread. But all that to say, yes, I'm doing my homework. I am not just a run-of-the-mill guy like, oh, he said something on Facebook that I didn't like, so I'm going to do a whole video on it. Like, I have been studying this man and his philosophy and his theology for well over a year. I'm his biggest fan, dude.
Yeah, you told me months ago when you were writing stuff up. I mean, so this is something for sure you've been doing for a long time.
Yeah,
absolutely. So why don't we do this? We have 2 parts here. You have part A is just, there's a 4-minute video that Tim did, and you're going to go through that, kind of pausing it, and then you actually have your thread that has some really good information, and you're going to go kind of through it, and so you can explain what you're getting through, and we'll go from there. How's that sound?
Sounds like a plan.
Awesome. So I'm going to pop your screen up here. Is it everything ready on your end?
Yeah, hopefully you'll be able to see the video. It has this weird looking face here. Do you see that?
Yeah, I'll take my little logo off. False advertising. No, it's all you, man. Whatever you want to do.
Okay, hopefully you'll be able to, the video will come in, but
yeah, if there's anything wrong techie with the video or sound, just hit us in the comments.
Well, my plan is to go through it bit by bit. I'll pause it, stop it. You can chime in if you want to whenever I pause it, but it is rather short, so it shouldn't take too long. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. Hopefully I don't get on too many tangents, but my wife probably is thinking to herself I will. So hopefully that doesn't happen. All right, let's play.
Awesome.
Does Harley Quinn
Do you hear that?
really love the Joker?
I do. It's kind of low on my end.
Okay, maybe I'll turn it up.
It's been said that
What about
Harley
that?
Quinn and the Joker are
Much better.
a great example of true love. I think this relationship is the farthest thing from it.
Okay, so basically he's just saying that, okay, the Joker and Harley Quinn, a lot of people say that's an example of true love, which I don't know who he's talking to, but to me, it's not an example of true love, even as a determinist. So I agree with him there. And he's like, it's the farthest thing from it. I'm like, congrats, we agree so far, so that's good.
I contend that this relationship is not true love at all. Rather, it's the epitome of evil.
I wouldn't go that far,
You see,
but
according to the Suicide
still
Squad
evil.
movie, the Joker kidnapped and brainwashed Harley against her will and causally determined her to be unable to resist him.
okay, before we get into this nice video here, I believe that he brainwashed her according to the will, against her will, to a certain extent. And I also believe that he used some sort of maybe manipulation or coercion, okay? Whatever sense that is. Stratton doesn't get into it, so I'm not going to get into it. But to say that the Joker causally determined her against her will so that she couldn't do otherwise, automatically off the gate, 30 seconds in actually, is absurd. Okay, I'm just going to assume libertarianism here. Let's just say I go into Stratton's worldview. Okay, he's trying to do an internal critique, and you'll see this as we go through the video. He's trying to assume what happens if determinism is true. Well, this is the entailment. That's awful. So we should reject determinism. That's what he's going to try to do, but he's going to beg the question the whole way through. So let me do him the favor. Let me assume his worldview, libertarianism. To me, I do not see how she was causally determined. Even if I said libertarianism is true, libertarianism is a thesis that anything outside of you or inside of you, you could have done otherwise. Okay? Because you are the source, primarily. You could have done otherwise because you are the source, or sometimes you are the source, therefore you could do otherwise. I mean, it doesn't matter. Those are the two main theses of libertarianism. And I would even say that Harley Quinn right here has that. She has the ability to do otherwise, to be infatuated with the Joker, not to be infatuated with the Joker. So I don't really see how he gets this causally determined. He almost conflates automatically, 30 seconds in, this idea of against her will with causal determinism. You see that? Like, it's how? Why is it automatically the case that even if I grant those two premises, why should I say that those are true in and of themselves? It seems to be an undistributed middle fallacy in here. Okay, but we'll continue. Let's hear him out. Let him make his case.
I wouldn't want you to break those perfect porcelain cat teeth when the juice hits your brain.
Now, I'm sure the Joker would have preferred it if Harley Quinn would have freely chosen to love and follow him, as that would have brought him more glory. But since she would not freely choose to be with the Joker, he decided to force himself upon her.
Okay. Again, why couldn't she decide otherwise? Why? It's very, if I understand this story, I mean, he's pressing an analogy here that determinism basically entails or is analogous to coercion of some type, okay? And we'll get into that later and how you press an analogy. But if I understand the story and the analogy depends upon the actual correct story, if I understand the DC story, she did choose to be with him. He may have influenced her in a variety of different ways, right? The Joker, with his awesome charm and handsome good looks or whatever. He may have emotionally manipulated her, but not so much where it overrides her actual agency and ability, even if libertarianism is true. So I really don't see how he conflates that it's automatically causal determinism. I wouldn't even use this as an example of causal determinism. I know he wants to be hip in pop culture here with DC, but I just don't see how it fits. I hope that makes sense. So
Yeah, sure
I
does.
don't. Yeah, so I don't think he can just conflate and say that, oh, she doesn't have the ability to do otherwise. That's definitely debatable, but this is not the worst problem that he's going to get into. So let's move on.
The Joker simply became irresistible as Harley Quinn had her ability to resist stolen from her. Now she has no ability or opportunity to do anything other than follow the Joker.
Okay, so basically what he's saying is, again, we're starting to see this analogy unfold. He's using words like irresistible, have no ability, and blah, blah, blah. And then he's going to start making the analogy to Calvinism. And in Calvinism, we have irresistible grace. We couldn't have done otherwise if God regenerates us, blah, 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 blah. So he's trying to make the case that in normal cases of Calvinist determinism, it is essentially like this. There's two ways to press that. Okay, two ways to press this analogy. Number one, it's the weak way. He could say that there's one relevant similarity between the two. So it could be coercion, force, determinism, or he could press it the other way and say the strong way instead of the weak way and say that there's no relevant difference between the two, between the case of Joker and Harley and between God and humanity. And so obviously for the compatibilists, like I'm a compatibilist, I'm a Calvinist, so it's a lot harder to refute the strong position because, it's a lot harder to refute the weak position just because I think that's right. No, I'm getting so confused, sorry. It's been a long day. It's a lot harder to refute the strong position when the libertarian, the non-Calvinist presses a strong position here, because then when they say there's no relevant difference, then we have to come up with a relevant difference. Okay, and so if we can come up with a relevant difference, well, then the analogy holds. But if he presses the weak way, I think it's clearly question begging, because all he could say, as far as I can tell, is, Harley is determined or Harley is coerced, or whatever. And so humanity is determined and humanity is coerced. But why does determinism entail coercion? We're certainly not told. And on the pain of begging the question, you can't just assume that in your analogy, right? That would be very clearly against the compatibilistic thesis off the bat. So I think giving him the benefit of the doubt will probably press the strong analogy, the case where there is no relevant difference between Harley and there is no relevant difference between humanity. They're irresistibly drawn. That's the point of the analogy. They're irresistibly drawn, and they could not do otherwise, right? So we'll continue to play and see what his conclusion is.
This relationship is not the paradigm of love, as many comic book junkies imagine.
I agree.
No, true love requires a legitimate and genuine choice on the part of both parties involved.
Okay, so now his conclusion is starting to unravel. That he's saying, okay, all right. So in both parties involved, since Harley didn't have the ability to love Joker, it's evil. And so now what he's going to try to press is that similarity. So now maybe he's not pressing the strong case where there's no relevant difference. So it seems to me that now he's switching and he's really trying to hammer in the conclusion that the two relevant similarities, or the one relevant similarity in both cases, is that Harley and humanity were irresistibly drawn, and that Harley and humanity could not do otherwise, and that you could not do otherwise, and if you could not do otherwise, then that's not true love. In other words, love entails the ability to do otherwise. And since you do not find that with irresistible grace and determining grace with Calvinism, and you do not find that in the Joker and Harley, they are analogous. So it seems to me now he's pressing the weak claim, which is awesome for me, because that means I could outwardly reject it as question begging. Because what's the one relevant? It seems to me, what's the one similarity he's pressing? That determinism entails coercion, And in order to love, you need the alternative possibility. But why is the alternative possibility necessary for love in the first place? That's also question begging. Where is that at all? Now, he's going to reject this if he ever listens to this. He's going to be like, oh, that's not question begging. You're misunderstanding me. Well, let's continue because we're only an hour and a half or a minute and a half in. So we'll continue and let him make his case more.
Both persons must freely choose to enter into a romantic marriage relationship for it to count as true love.
I have a question, Derek. Does God have the ability to not love himself?
Does God have the ability to not love himself?
Yeah, can God have the ability to not love? Maybe not himself, maybe just creatures. Does God have the ability to not love?
Sure.
How? A categorical. Let me rephrase this. And Stratton makes the same case. To not love, like if he's love, right? And I think this is what Stratton's trying to make. If he's love, God is love. Then by definition, okay, he must love. Maybe not in the same sense as everything else, because as Calvinists, we would say reprobates are not loved in the same sense as the elect, right? But can he categorically not love if he is love? And I think...
yeah, I'd say no to that. Of course,
exactly.
There's more theological versus philosophical, nuance as well.
Yeah, so this is exactly what I think Stratton is trying to make. He's saying in order for it to be a true love relationship, you need the ability to do otherwise. But God doesn't even have the ability to not love within the Trinity. From all eternity past, you have the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost in a loving relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
He cannot not love like the Holy Spirit or God or whatever. I mean, they are wedded together in that, and they don't have the ability. So I have to press and ask, why is it the case that we need that ability in order to genuinely love? If they have genuine love, the epitome of what love is, then why is it the case that we need genuine love? Okay, and this is going to continue coming through as we go.
Otherwise, the most a person could hope for is something akin to Stockholm Syndrome. But that's not true love.
I agree.
Stockholm Syndrome is psychological trauma.
I also agree.
This is not true love. It's pure evil.
Yep.
Now, surprisingly, many Christians, known as Calvinists, not to mention Muslims, have a view of God like that of the Joker. They contend.
Do you have a view of God like that, like a Joker, Derek? When you think and pray to God, do you like, oh, thank you, Joker, for irresistibly saving me against my will?
I saw how he threw in the whole little Muslim comment too, right?
Yeah, so this is patently absurd. Nowhere does Calvinist, and he's doing an internal critique, right? Mm-hmm. So he's basically saying, let's adopt the Calvinistic system of irresistible grace. Where does that lead you? It leads you to abusive love. That's literally what the title of it says. Determinism leads to abusive love. So he has to first adopt determinism and then have it lead to something absurd, which he's going to say is ridiculous in a bit. And then he's like, great, so it's ridiculous. Therefore, determinism probably isn't true. Okay, so I have many objections to this, and we'll see it all. But at the very beginning, in order to do that, you have to adopt our premises. That's how a reductio ad absurdum works. You must enthrall yourself into the premises of your opponent so that we check off the list like, yep, I agree with that, yep. And then we get to the conclusion, bam, you see how it leads to this? Oh, shoot. Oh, you're probably right. So I probably should adopt a different worldview instead. But that only works when you have agreement upon the premises. I don't even agree with his premises because one of his premises is that determinism entails coercion, or it's at least implied. Okay? That's forcing, one of his premises. Yeah, forcing. Why? How? Where? What determinist philosopher tells you this? And
in fact, like, people emphatically say the opposite all the time.
What do you mean?
People argue the opposite of it's not coercion. It's not, and they get into why it's, you know what I mean? So
yeah, exactly. That's the point. Like no determinist, no philosopher would ever, any philosopher worth their salt would ever argue that, not even mention it as a footnote. They would wholly reject that you can be determined and it leads to forcefulness. And yet we see someone like Stratton here pulling out the guns, being like, it leads to abusive love, because just like Harley is coerced, and just like humanity under God is coerced, to irresistibly love him. I mean, it's not even analogous. It's really comical to me. It's very comical. So we're going to continue to see this charade or straw man of the Calvinistic view. Remember, in order to do a reductio, you need to assume the premises of your opponent, lead those agreed upon premises to a ridiculous conclusion, and then the opponent's like, oh yeah, crap, I have to forsake this. But if we don't agree on those premises, well then I'm going to forsake his argument, and it's bogus. His reductio ad absurdum fails. So let's continue.
And that you and I have no choice in regard to if we will follow God or not.
We have no categorical choice. And notice earlier he said genuine choice. Okay, that was okay. So he's assuming the fact that a genuine choice means libertarian free choice. First of all, this is also, when he's talking about choice, this is ridiculous, because I'll put it in context for you. Ready? When he was doing his videos last year with Bignon, this back and forth, okay, he would say that what kind of choice are you really making if you're determined? Bignon responded that of course determinists believe that we make choices. In fact, it goes like this: if God determines me to choose P or to choose X, then I will choose X. So premise 1, if God determines me to choose X, then I will choose X. Premise 2, God determines me to choose X, so via modus ponens, therefore I will choose X. Nothing in that is contradictory. I choose, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now, which is even hilarious, in his book, in Stratton's book, he actually equivocates and says that Bignon doesn't make choices. That choices to determinists like Sam Harris and Bignon, he conflates scientific determinism with theological determinism, that the illusion of choices is present. Bignon responds in a scathing review to Stratton's book, saying, no, again, we make choices. Okay, we make he says that Bignon says that in Stratton, or in his review against Stratton's book. Okay, that came out on New Year's Day, actually, this year. Okay, after all of that, this video came out June 14th. Is Stratton seriously still making that claim? Is he seriously still making the claim that determinism doesn't lead to choice? Again, absurd. It has been clearly demonstrated that we have choices. It is not the kind of choice he thinks it is, but then he needs to demonstrate that it must be that kind of choice, namely a libertarian categorical choice. And not just assume that a genuine choice is actually a libertarian choice. That's question begging. I found it hilarious that after these many exchanges with Bignon, he's still pressing the exact same minute problem that Bignon clearly showed is false, which means he's not actually doing due diligence when it comes to these debates. Okay, so I wanted to point out because it's very important, and to me it shows Stratton's credibility as extremely wanting. I mean, to me it really severely shows a lack of credibility on Stratton's part here. Okay, so let's continue.
Many theologians incorrectly think that God does something to certain individuals in which these people then become incapable of anything other than following him. Indeed, these theologians refer to this as irresistible grace. Some Christians suggest that humans still possess something called compatibilistic freedom as opposed to libertarian freedom. And it's asserted that they are still responsible for their beliefs and behaviors, even though God causally determines all of their thoughts, wants, and desires which then guarantees certain actions to occur.
Okay. Where do we assert this? Where do we assert that compatibilism is the thesis that we are morally responsible and determined? And we are morally responsible even though God determines all this and all that, everything about humanity. As if like he's putting a look on his face that it's like, yeah, it kind of sounds ridiculous, right? You feeling me? This doesn't really sound good. It's just merely asserted. So you're right. We should probably just get rid of it. That's ridiculous. That itself is ridiculous. Preciado, Bignon, John Martin Fisher, Mark Ravizza, parts of Paraboom, Sartario, Nelkin, all compatibilists. McKenna, they all say the same thing, and they all argue for the thesis of compatibilism. My goodness. I know it's a 4-minute video, so let's give them some credit. But this pop level theology is just not going to cut it, especially when you're talking about philosophy, because what you're doing is marginalizing. You're marginalizing views, incorrect views for it may be for a good cause, but you're marginalizing views for in an incorrect way, even though the conclusion, as we'll see, is a conclusion that I agree with. But that's it. You just can't do that. You need to be able to address the other person's views. So let's see what he has to say about compatibilism, Derek.
All right.
Now, if you think that sounds ridiculous, join the club. Some would say.
So what did he do? He just finished his Reductio ad absurdum argument and said, yeah, that's ridiculous. There's no way it can be ridiculous. Yeah, I would agree that if Harley, let's just say she is coerced, I would agree that if she is coerced, she's not responsible. Compatibilists don't argue that all determining sequences are equally valid or equally the same. And this is something that Stratton has no idea about. He never touches on it because to him, the how is irrelevant. And that's a direct quote from his rejoinder. The how is irrelevant. Ed is Ed. If you're causally determined and all things about you are causally determined, then that means everything about you, even how you come about something, is causally determined. And that's just patently false. You know why? No philosopher tries to argue that. No libertarian philosopher tries to argue that because they understand, according to the compatibilists, that there's a difference between determining sequences. Someone like Harley and someone like Harley is not analogous to someone like me or you when we are saved by irresistible grace. Why? Because God works and determines through our agency with regards to determinism, okay, and not against it, okay? Now, I actually have an illustration to show this, but before I show that, I want to make it emphatically clear, and actually Thaddeus Williams, who wrote a whole book on how libertarian freedom is not necessary for love at all. Okay, it's amazing. It's called Love, Freedom, and Evil by Thaddeus Williams. He's actually a professor at Biola, Stratton's alma mater. Okay, so he says that libertarian freedom is not necessary for love, namely because there's the different determining sequences. There, you can be determined where it circumvents your heart or circumvents your agency in such a way, whereas your agency is left out of it, okay, overrided essentially. So he calls that heart circumvention. And then there's a determining mechanism that is something like heart reformation, which he says is exactly what Calvinism is. That's exactly what regeneration, irresistible grace is. Heart reformation. God works through, in tandem to our agency, not against it, but in tandem to our agency, in order to reform it, right? To transform it, actually, right? So it's not against, right? And so this idea of against and through has to do with determining mechanisms. And in fact, Kevin Tempe, who is part of Stratton's incompatibilist camp, actually agrees with this as well. So it's not just a compatibilistic thing. It is also a source incompatibilistic thing, which Kevin Tempe is a source in Compatibilist. So he needs to argue the actual case here. So now, what's my illustration? I'm a math teacher, okay? I work with this program called Desmos. This program is awesome. It's free online, just a short plug. But I wanted to do an illustration of this, and I thought about this a long time ago, and I'm like, okay, this is actually charged against us a lot, especially from provisionists, right, Derek? When we have this idea of, oh, he works against our agency, right? He works against our will. Before we were this at one time, and then God changes us, and now we're this at one time. He works against us, right? And if that's the case, well, then Stratton may have a point here. But is it though? This is how I would classify Calvinist regeneration. It looks something like this. So I'm going to show up some of this stuff. The numbers are completely irrelevant. All you need to look at is the graph. That's all you need to look at. Okay.
It's some of that smart stuff, huh?
Yeah. All you need to look at is the graph. Because the graph is the most important. Okay. But the numbers are completely arbitrary. It doesn't matter. It's just for illustration. So I'm letting G be God's grace. So random function, quadratic function. So this is God's grace. Okay. H be humanity who's depraved. So H is just the depraved humanity. So that's black. So God's grace is illuminating, so it's orange, right? And it's G, humanity's black because we're evil. Okay? I thought I was cheeky then, or kind of cute. Okay, so now R is God's grace through faith, i.e. regeneration. So big R is the purple. So this is regeneration right here, okay? I did it purple because, purple is royalty. And so we are now part of God's kingdom, right? We're royal. Like yeah, it's nice. Now, R, we'll get to in a little bit. Little r is reprobate. Humans left to themselves. And then S is the function of salvation, which I didn't get to, so I didn't have time to do that. I think that would be pretty cool, though. But I didn't get to that. But it's not necessary. Here's what I think it is. Okay, look at the graph. Just the graph. This is God's grace. Obviously, it's separate from humanity. But what I want to say is that with regards to regeneration, it's a reformation. It's working in alignment with our will. So that means as we zoom up closer and closer and closer to the moment of regeneration, which is right here, okay, that point, that's the moment of regeneration, okay? You feeling me so far?
Yeah, this is great.
At that moment, as I'm getting closer and closer and closer and closer, notice how G, orange, God's grace, and humanity are getting closer and closer and closer. You feeling me? Yeah. They're getting so close to the point where they're almost converging. And in calculus, we would say that they are converging eventually. Okay. Now it's going to be impossible because the more I zoom up, obviously it'll be like, it's just decimals and blah, 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 blah. But that's why calculus is involved, which I'm not going to get into. It's irrelevant for our, but here's the point. It's a converging will, almost in alignment with our will. It started off at the very beginning completely not in alignment with our will. But as God works through us, as God works circumstances to bring us to him, he works in such a way as to grab our wills in accordance to our wills and irresistibly draw us to the point where it's captivating, not coercive, but it's like Matthew 13:44, where you see a pearl of great price and you love it so much that you want to sell everything you have. You want to give up your whole life. That's exactly what regeneration is. This idea that regeneration is basically coercion and leads to abusive love and Stockholm syndrome is just absurd. In fact, this is what I think they think that Calvinist regeneration is. Ready? This is what actual Calvinistic regeneration is. This is what I think that they think that it is. This. Humans, and then just automatically God's grace just intervening. Just like not converging at all, but they just like, oh, you're just a new human being. And then
based on their libertarianism, their libertarian free will.
Yes, but again, since it's an internal critique, they need to assume what we say regeneration is first, They need to assume what we say regeneration is first, and then go from there. That's how Reductio works, right? And so I put this together actually real quick, like a while
I'm
back.
impressed, man. That's pretty cool.
I think it works to drill the point home where Calvinism argues that it's heart reformation, not heart circumvention. But obviously, Stratton doesn't understand the two. So
this is exactly what the Joker did to Harley Quinn.
Exactly.
And Harley freely loves and follows the Joker, although she's incapable of doing otherwise.
So now it's perfect. He presses the one relevant similarity. This is exactly what the Joker does with Harley Quinn. And I'm saying, great. So now, since you're pressing the weak objection, the weak claim of the analogy, it's so much easier for me to refute. Thanks. It's question begging, because you're assuming that determinism entails coercion. So then I have to just point out one relevant difference, and namely that coercion entails force or threats. And since it's an internal critique, you must not assume that determinism entails forcefulness or threats. But since you do, it's question begging. Okay. Now he's going to go on this whole long spiel about the gospel, and we're going to agree with it because we agree with the gospel, right?
On this view, however, God seems to be worse than the Joker, because God is ultimately responsible for every person's wants and desires, which guarantees every person's thoughts and actions.
So I'm not going to get too much into this, but it does depend upon what kind of responsibility we're talking about here. But no philosopher, none, even the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which I double checked, if you look on moral responsibility versus causal responsibility, it literally says it just cannot be done that causal responsibility entails moral responsibility. Why? Because they're just not related. They have two different outcomes. They're interested in two different things. So if he's seriously going to press that, oh, because God caused it, he's morally responsible in a culpable sense, he just doesn't understand the philosophy then. No philosopher says that. None. Because it's a stupid objection. Like, seriously, I'm using that word pointedly because it is. Okay, I love the brother. I love Tim. But he needs to seriously do the homework in order to make that claim like that.
Note the chain of metaphysical dominoes.
We don't believe in dominoes. We don't believe in God's providence as metaphysical dominoes. Again, this is an internal critique. You got it wrong. Once again, we believe at best the authorial model of providence. I'm not going to get into that, but we don't believe that's a chain of metaphysical dominoes. That could, yes, circumvent agency. It's very easy to see who's really responsible given the dominoes, and that circumvents the agency of the person. Okay? But thank our lucky stars, we don't hold to that, right? We hold to other models of providence. So again, straw man.
And then God holds everybody, or every
this is my favorite
domino, eternally responsible and accountable for things he was actually responsible for, things that God causally determined.
Again, it depends on the responsibility. Causal responsibility doesn't entail moral responsibility. Doesn't depend on the domino. I mean, there's so many problems with this. I mean, I could just continue. Like it's been false. It's been falsified 2 minutes ago, but he just keeps stacking up, which makes the video even worse. He just keeps stacking up wrong thing about wrong premise about wrong premise, because he's assuming that Calvinism actually entails dominoes, coercion. It's absurd.
It's almost like he has his theological presuppositions already, and he's mixing the two. So he's concluding the stuff we always hear from a lot of these non-Calvinist theology groups.
Yeah. I mean, this is giving me a headache. That's how bad it is.
Make no mistake. God is not like the Joker.
He's a gentleman.
God is a maximally great being, the paradigm of goodness, and is perfectly loving to all people. You see, God wants a true love relationship with each and every one of us, and invites us. God invites you to freely love and follow him forever. Unlike the Joker, you see, God is a gentleman. He loves us unconditionally and invites you and I to love him.
So he's going on this spiel of the gospel, which, you know, he can do his plug. I don't really care. And I love the gospel. Obviously, we have different ideas of what the gospel entails. We do agree on the essentials of what the gospel is, right? But we disagree on what the gospel entails, and that's fine. So I'm not going to get into that because he's just saying what the gospel is.
In return, since God first loved us.
Yeah.
Unlike Harley Quinn, you have a choice to love God and
Harley Quinn, I think, did have a choice. She did. It wasn't, at best, it was influencing manipulation. It wasn't overriding manipulation. And as far as I can tell, and as far as I can remember, the story itself of Harley and the Joker, she wanted, in fact, she wanted to be like the Joker and be in love with him and everything, right? But then again, I'm not a DC fan because, you know, DC sucks.
to eternity, or to divorce yourself from him forever. Unlike Harley Quinn, you are genuinely responsible for your thoughts, according to 2 Corinthians 10:5, and your following actions.
So I'll stop the video here because then he just continues. But Harley Quinn, I think, was genuinely responsible for it. I don't think anyone in that universe, in the DC universe, would not hold Harley Quinn responsible for becoming who she was, right? Yeah. One last thing I want to press. And this is a really big one before we get into the responses here. Is that in his book, he tries to say that you can be determined. He tries to make the case that tulip Calvinism is compatible with mere Molinism. So you can be determined in matters above, and you can not determined, let's just say, in matters below. So matters above, the spiritual realm, perhaps salvation you could be determined in. And then in non-salvific matters, like going to the grocery store, or robbing a bank or whatever, you can have a limited libertarian freedom is what he calls it. And how he describes it is exactly that. The agent could do, like, rob the grocery store, rob the liquor store. He could just think about robbing this or think about doing this evil act. So it seems to me that what he has in mind, Stratton, in his book, is sin 1, the agent can do, sin 2, the agent can do, sin 3, the agent can do, and sin 4, the agent can do, all so on. So if this idea of limited libertarian freedom that he has is correct, then the agent could do sin 1, sin 2, sin 3, blah, 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 blah. Okay? Okay. Now, when it comes to determinism, and when it comes to matters above, perhaps I think Stratton implicitly says it in his book that you can be determined of salvation. So you can have salvation be determined and keep your tulip, you know, whatever. Now, what's the problem here? Okay. He says that love entails libertarian freedom. If I take his limited libertarian freedom to be exactly how he states it in his book, that the agent can pretty much just do all sinful actions, and then apart from grace, he can't do anything right, then he's determined based off of, you know, Calvinistic determinism on the salvific part, but then goes along his way doing libertarian freedom on everything else. Okay, so before the salvation, if he can just do sinful options, does he truly have the categorical ability to love God or not love God? That's a question towards Stratton. Okay, and I think for him to be consistent, he has to say no, which means the whole enterprise of trying to make mere Molinism compatible with tulip is absurd. Okay, it's just absurd, because now what they want to say is, okay, and even this video is more absurd, because now what they want to say is, or what he wants to say is, oh yes, you need the liberty to do otherwise for love, but they don't even have the liberty to do otherwise for love, the categorical liberty to do otherwise for love, if limited libertarian freedom is correct. Okay. If you're familiar with Stratton's work, if anyone's watching and familiar with Stratton's work, then they would know what I'm talking about. Sounds good?
That's good stuff, man. Yeah.
Let's leave the video. Okay. I'm not planning on getting through all of this, just because it's going to be ad nauseum. He's going to be repeating it actually a lot.
Sure.
But if you're ready, I'm ready. That sounds good.
Tell them kind of the format, which one's you, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so here's the format here. This is a strand on Facebook. The link will be in the description of the article that I was responding to. And I'm in bold. So basically he's quoting me. So everything in bold is me. Okay, what I said in response to a previous reply for Stratton. Okay, so everything not in bold is what he says. Sounds good?
Sounds good.
So what we wanted to do is I'm going to read my response, and then our lovely host is going to try to read Stratton's responses, and then I'm going to try to respond as best as I possibly can with the time we have, and we're going to try to go from there.
Sounds good.
Okay. So he posed this idea, and he's well known for the free thinking argument. The free thinking argument, I'll actually read the controversial premise here. It's premise 3 from his book. If humans do not possess libertarian freedom, then humans do not possess the ability to rationally infer or rationally affirm knowledge claims. That's from the free thinking argument against naturalism. So premise 3, I'll say it again. If humans do not possess libertarian freedom, then humans cannot and do not possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. That's the basic idea of what he's trying to get at here, basically. But read the article just in case. I say this: how do you know that metaphysical categorical access to alternative possibilities is necessary in order to evaluate or judge? Yeah.
Well, it's pretty simple. If one possesses no metaphysical opportunity to access X, then one cannot access X. If one cannot access X, one stands in no position to know if X should have been accessed. This is not rocket science.
Yeah, it's not rocket science, Derek. I should know this, right? We should know this. It's obvious. It's intuitive, is what they would say. Well, it's not pretty simple, because you're smuggling in a lot of things, and this is where you'll start to see where we're just talking past each other the whole time. So he says if one possesses no metaphysical opportunity, what he means there is no metaphysical categorical opportunity. Now, he doesn't like using the word categorical, but he says it all the time in his book, even though he said it in this thread that he barely uses the word categorical anymore. It doesn't matter. He's a libertarian. He believes in the garden of forking paths, especially when it comes to deliberations, because that's what he's known for. In the mind, deliberations, I could think otherwise. I can evaluate or judge otherwise. So I'm asking, why is the garden of forking paths this way, that way, that way? Why can I actually choose? Or why do I have to have access to every single pathway in order to be actually said to be an evaluator, to be a judger, and so forth? He says if one possesses no metaphysical opportunity to access X, then one cannot access X. And I agree if we aren't equivocating on that opportunity. Okay. And plus, I like to throw out opportunity means circumstances available in order to make a position open for you. If Molinism is true, God could have just actualized a world in which you had metaphysical opportunity to access certain information about your deliberations in one world, but then actualize another world in which you don't. So how do you know that this is a world in which God actualized that you do have opportunity to access X? So we're going to start to see this a little bit further, but he says if one cannot access X, then one stands in no position. And I also agree, but what kind of position? Okay, I think, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, I hope, that we don't have any external position to know. Okay, and so this has to do with justification and the theory of a justification. How do I know what I know? So he's bringing in epistemology, the study of knowledge. So how do I know what I know? And he's saying you have no position to know, to actually be justified whether or not X is the one that should have been accessed. And this right here is his basic mantra throughout the whole thing. Okay, so it's going to be repeated a lot. So that's why I'm spending a lot of time on this short little paragraph, because I want to get the basics down. But I say, yes, you're right, Stratton. you have no external position. You have no external position to know. If ed is true, exhaustive divine determinism, ed, if that is true, then yes, you don't have any external position to know. But you could have internal position to know if you're aware of those reasons. And we're going to see more of that later. So I say, why can't epistemic access work? And we're going to explain what epistemic access is, or conditional access. But like Pereboom and Nelkin and Caruso have argued for. That's what I say.
All right. I explained above, one can merely add epistemic accessibility to my case. Please tell me how Pereboom, Nelkin, and Caruso escapes my argument if the mad scientist causally determines you to not have actual epistemic access to alternative EJOs.
So first of all, EJOs are what he calls evaluative judgment options. So it's just options, like categorical options in the brain. When you deliberate, you have evaluative judgment options to deliberate about this, to weigh that part, to maybe think about this part of an argument, and so forth. Does that make sense? So it's kind of, that's how he defines EJOs, evaluative judgment options. And he does think that those are necessary for deliberation, and deliberation is necessary for rationality, obviously, which means if EJOs is a libertarian concept like categorical options, rationality entails libertarianism or options. Okay, let's just say rationality entails options, like categorical options. And because you have options, that's libertarian freedom. That's his basic kind of idea here. Okay, I list 3 philosophers, prominent philosophers, on what they call deliberation compatibilism. So there's what he is a deliberation incompatibilist. Okay, which means that the method or the act, the mental act of deliberating, is not compatible with determinism. Okay, so deliberation compatibilism in the philosophical literature is obviously the negation that the method or act or mental act of deliberating is compatible with determinism. And these are probably the most prominent philosophers on what we call deliberation compatibilism. They argue for that you do not need alternative ability or alternative options available to you as an agent in order to say that you deliberate and to say that obviously you're rational. Okay, there's whole chapters from books on this, specifically from Pereboom and Nelkin and Caruso, which apparently Stratton has interacted with, has written an article last year called On the Compatibility of Rational Deliberation. Okay, now he wants to say all that to say epistemic accessibility. He wants to say that epistemic accessibility does nothing to escape the charge. What epistemic, I mean, real short, because I don't want to get too much into it, but epistemic accessibility is if it's something is epistemically or deliberate or decisionally efficacious. Okay, if a deliberative option is efficacious for you, that means if it's solid enough for you to be able to actually deliberate on it, and I'm doing broad brushstrokes here, that means you have epistemic accessibility to it. So basically you can be receptive to these epistemic alternatives. Does that make sense? Like you can be receptive to these epistemic alternatives. Now he retorts saying, oh, if you're causally determined, then you're causally determined to not have actual epistemic access. So I have to say, why does actual what does actual epistemic access even mean? Okay, he's the one with the argument, by the way. He posted the OP. He was the one with the burden of proof this whole way down. He needs to show me what does actual epistemic actually mean. All I need to do is show one incy-bincy, itty-bitty skeptical scenario in which I posit, and then that's an alternative to his view. Okay, so and now he's trying to kind of smuggle those views into his own and say, well, I can merely add epistemic accessibility. And then I can say, why does the categorical epistemic accessibility necessary? So it's really, he can't get away from this, like, I don't know, this meta category. okay, this meta category. And we're going to see this a lot. And I'm actually going to quote Nelkin in a little bit. But let's move on, because I think, and I'm going to quote Bignon too, because this is very, very important to the case. I say, additionally, why can't conditional metaphysics or conditional metaphysical access work to alternatives, such as Bignon's case in chapter 5? If you haven't read Bignon's book, nice plug, Excusing Sinners, Blaming God, you should get it. It's right here. It's amazing. So it's for basically a compatibilist Bible. It's awesome. But why, I ask, why must it be categorically accessible to the agent?
My case is simple, and you already quoted me. If something or someone else causally determines alternative EJOs to be blocked off and locked away from your access, then how do you know if you should have evaluated or judged otherwise?
What if God causally, weakly actualize a world in which you have certain evidence blocked off from you that informs your decision about which method or which act or which deliberation to actually actualize? I mean, the same can be said for Molinism, okay? But he says if something or someone else causally determines alternative EGOs, evaluative judgment options, to be blocked off from your access, externally blocked off, and categorically, categorical options, then how do you know if you should have evaluated or judged otherwise? I know because I'm aware of the reasons. That's how I know. He's assuming that I'm in no position externally to know. But internalism is compatible with determinism. Okay, so the internalism is just a location of justification. How can you be justified of certain options? How can you be justified in your knowledge or your judgment? Okay, and the location of that is either external to you or internal to you. And he's assuming that it must be, if it's determined, that external to you. But it can be internal to me. And all that requires is for you to be internal, or all that requires is for you to be aware of the reasons, regardless of determinism and whether or not it obtains. Okay? Regardless of determinism and whether or not it obtains. But he still tries to sneak in this categorical alternative. Okay, and I'm still going to press that because it is an equivocation. If someone else determines alternative categorical options to be blocked off, then how do I know whether or not I should have evaluated or judged otherwise? First of all, I don't think evaluative judgments are necessary. He needs to show that are necessary for deliberation. And I also don't think I need to be external to the to my deliberation. I can be internal to my deliberation. So what he's trying to press here, Derek, is he's trying to press his view of deliberation. But here's the problem. If there's one opposing view, and I've mentioned Bignon, and I mentioned Nelkin there, and I've mentioned Parabum. Okay, so I've mentioned all of those different cases where they all have this idea of either epistemic access or conditional access to your deliberations. Now, Stratton wants to claim all the way throughout this thread is that you must have metaphysical access in order to deliberate. Metaphysical access, categorical access, in order to deliberate. Okay? Okay. I am saying is if there's even one alternative that shows that you can deliberate without having metaphysical access, categorical access, then you can be said to evaluate and judge and still be considered rational, contrary to what Stratton wants to say. And like I said, I've mentioned Parabum, Nelkin, Crusoe, and Bignon. So what I want to do is actually quote Nelkin here, because it's very, very, very helpful. Okay, very helpful. Nelkin quotes in her book. It's called "Making Sense of Free Will" or "Freedom and Moral Responsibility." Freedom and Responsibility. Amazing book. She's a compatibilist. She has a whole chapter on deliberation compatibilism. Isn't that exciting? And whether or not alternatives are actually necessary for deliberation. Okay. Now she quotes on page 124 Van Inwagen. Van Inwagen is a famous incompatibilist, famous for the consequence argument. So she quotes him. Van Inwagen says, "Of course there are determinists who have deliberated. but they must therefore be holders of contradictory beliefs. Because obviously Van Inwagen thinks that, oh, in order to deliberate, you need alternative options, just like Stratton thinks, right? That's pretty much what they think. And they say, oh yeah, Stratton wants to say, oh, you're a determinist, right? So you don't have any metaphysical access. You don't have any categorical access to evaluate or judge otherwise. And I'm saying, yeah, you're right. I just don't think categorical access is necessary. But he's saying, therefore, then, if you're still claiming determinism and you rationalize, you're holding a contradictory belief. Your belief in determinism is self-defeating. He actually says that in his book, Mere Molinism, okay? It's self-defeating. So that's the basic scope. Now, what does Nelkin say? At this point, I quote page 125, at this point in the debate, the dialectic can take a number of turns. How should the compatibilists respond to this idea of alternative EJOs being necessary for deliberation? And Nelkin says, but a natural way to proceed, the compatibilists to proceed, is to suggest that if there is a way of accounting for deliberation and its failure without attributing contradictory beliefs to otherwise rational people, we should do so. And I agree. But the question that faces us then is, again, whether there is an alternative way of accounting for the data, an alternative view other than Stratton's view. Nelkin says, attributing to all rational deliberators beliefs entailing indeterminism must rest on a mistaken view of the point of rational deliberation, like what it actually means, which means she's saying those deliberation incompatibilists, like Stratton, has a mistaken view of what it really means to be rationally deliberative in your deliberation. Good so far?
Mm-hmm.
She says, Nelkin, continuing, if we focus on the idea that the aim of deliberation is to find and adopt good reasons for acting, and to decide and act on the basis of those reasons, then we will see that the aim of deliberation is not the aim of actualizing one of multiple indeterministic possibilities, which is exactly what Stratton is wanting to say. In fact, Nelkin says, when we focus on this reason-centered aim of deliberation, we can generate a plausible understanding of the Kantian claim, or just the incompatibilist claim, that deliberators must take themselves to be free, that makes no obvious use of alternatives at all. So what is she saying? She's basically saying that if we can come up with a view that doesn't use any alternatives, any categorical metaphysical alternatives, then that blows his view out of the water. Okay? And I would agree. Now, there's a variety of different views. I mentioned the epistemic view. Stratton seems to think that he can just add epistemic ability or epistemic accessibility in his case, and that does the picture. Obviously, I'm giving that these people don't agree. Okay? And then Bignon's case. Now, what does Bignon say? And I'll quote this, and then we'll actually start going into the thread. And like I said, I posted a lot here, Derek. We're not going to get through all of it, which is fine by me. But, Bignon, he says this: the problem with this argument, deliberation incompatibilism, the idea that you need alternative abilities in order to deliberate. You need alternative abilities to be necessary, categorically available to you in order to deliberate. Bignon says in his book, Excusing Sinners, Blaming God, page 88, which Stratton says he's actually dealt with before. Okay. The problem with this argument, Bignon says, is that rational deliberation, no less for moral judgments, what is known to be necessary is a conditional ability to choose otherwise, not a categorical one. What matters is that we believe that the options before us would be accessible if we were to choose them. Certainly, no one ever deliberates about options that would be impossible, even if one were to choose them. John Martin Fisher describes it as follows: for rational deliberation, I can go to the movies later insofar as I would go to the movies if I were to choose to go to the movies. And I can go to the lecture insofar as I would go to the lecture if I were to choose to go to the lecture. I do not deliberate about whether to jump on the moon or jump to the moon because, in part at least, I would not successfully jump to the moon, even if I were to choose to jump to the moon. So here's the point. Okay, here's the point. We don't deliberate about something not because we lack the categorical ability, but we don't deliberate about something because we don't deliberate it even if we couldn't have done otherwise, even if we had couldn't want to or couldn't try to or whatever. So that counterfactual pair is what's necessary, not the categorical. And there's so much to talk about this in so little time, but I don't want to get too much into it. You can read, his book if you want to, but that's what he thinks, that the conditional is what's necessary. It's not about whether or not God determines you, the metaphysics, or God determines your conditions or whatever. So what? God determines the conditions. Yes, he determines which reasons are where to me at certain times. Yes. So if the categorical options are not necessary for deliberation in something like epistemic access and something like conditional metaphysical access is, then when I am said to deliberate, all that's necessary is conditional metaphysical access or epistemological access. That is it, which means it completely avoids his whole view. And guess what? He has dealt with none of it in his book. None. He has quoted none of them. And he said he read Bignon's book. If he wants to convince someone like me, like a compatibilist in this thread, he must understand that he needs to actually deal with the cases, not just simply say, I take those into account. Okay? It's just pure asinine. Okay. I want to kind of jump around here.
Sure.
I'm trying to see which is better. This is all good stuff but you'll start to see he's just repeating the same stuff, right? The same stuff over and over and over again, which is fine. I'm trying to see. Okay, this part. This is my favorite part. One of my favorite parts. Okay. Okay. So I said, please tell me how Paraboom, Nelkin, and Caruso escapes my argument. Okay. And then he says you responded with assertions because they are deliberation compatibilists. So that's what I say. They are deliberative compatibilists. They argue that the fact of deliberating does not require metaphysical opportunity or alternatives, or rather epistemic, opportunity. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Just like what I explained. Now, he says this. If you want to just read the first paragraph there.
Sure. In my case, demonstrates why one must have actual access to alternative EJOs. I made an argument. Some might assert this access is not necessary, but I simply show why these assertions fail.
How? By just appealing to the same argument? That's question begging. You can't just circle around like that. You can't just appeal to the same argument over and over and over again and just say, well, if you don't see it, then you don't see it. I'm showing you, and he was so close. My argument demonstrates why one must have actual blah, blah, blah. I made an argument. Some might assert that this access is not necessary. Yes, but they don't assert it. They argue for it. And since you have the burden of proof, you must show that those alternatives fail. Okay, those alternatives fail. And now he says, well, I simply show why these alternatives fail. How? By appealing back to the same argument? No, you need to quote them. You need to show me exactly what these authors say, why it doesn't matter. Okay? And you also, by the way, can't just assume that determinism, the determining mechanism, is all the same kind of determinism all the way out throughout the agent's life. There's different determining mechanisms. Okay? You must also understand that. So
I got a question, Colton.
Yeah.
Jump in. So just to circle back on something you said earlier, does Tim hold to the tulip and as a Molinist, or is he just saying you can do it, or does he actually do it?
He's just saying that you can do it, that you can hold to tulip and you can be determined, let's just say, unto salvation.
Because wouldn't he have to defend exactly what he's attacking you over, at least for that piece of determinism with salvation throughout the Christian's life?
He would have to defend that, yes. Okay. Because to me, I mean, I'm not going to show you, but I do in my writing in that book that I'm saying I've written extensively on this, what I call the Strattonian dilemma. Because I've concocted this dilemma for him. I'm not going to reveal it right now, but I will when I release the book. So it's this dilemma for him that he has to give up certain things. If he wants to try to take the best of both worlds and mix it together, he can't necessarily have it. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah. So that's all I'm saying. Like, he just can't necessarily have it. So.
Got it.
Can I continue?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, okay. I just wanted to. It was just on my mind there for a second.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So I can kind of summarize this, but he said that over the past decade, I've read nearly all of the above. So he's talking about Nelkin, Paraboom, Caruso, whatever, and those I have not read in audio and vid lectures. I crafted my case. So he's saying he's read them and then he crafted his case. Right? Okay. My arguments take into account what they have already written. I don't understand what that means. He may mean that even in a charitable interpretation, he may mean that, okay, given what they say about determinism and compatibilism, my argument may kind of go on the back route and kind of assuage their arguments. So it's kind of like a counterpunch or whatever. Like, they don't really assume, or they don't really take into account everything. And then my argument takes into account everything because it's exhaustive determinism. And so that kind of, I don't know, gets them into a bubble. I don't really know how to describe it, but I have it in my mind. And so I think that's what he may be saying. But if he's saying that I take into account, like, I've already crafted my case based on their accounts, then why doesn't he ever quote them? Like, why? Why doesn't he ever quote them at all? And I have a friend, actually, a really close philosopher friend, that he's saying that this, if we take that interpretation of it, it's kind of borderline plagiarism, because you're not quoting any of these authors, but yet you take them into account. What? If how philosophy is done is that you quote an author. Okay, they say this. Their view is this. Does it work? No. Here's why. But he doesn't do any of that. Why doesn't he do any of that? Now, I'm not saying that it's actually plagiarism, but I'm saying is he should engage with them a lot more, and he doesn't. And so since he doesn't, then why should I believe that alternatives are actually necessary? They have not dealt with my specific case. My case is new. So, and neither of you. Oh, that's cute. Okay, neither of you. Don't you love me? Yeah, neither of you. My case is new. I don't care how new it is. You haven't shown all options to the categorical options to be necessary for deliberation. You just haven't. You've assumed it in your argument, and you've assumed it with questions around it, but that doesn't make it any less question begging. You may say, oh, it's an abductive conclusion. So abductive conclusions can still be question begging. It doesn't matter. Like, and so you have data apparently that is better than my data, and so you can only make an abductive conclusion based off data. So show me the actual data here. So he thinks that it falls flat, and he says it's keep asserting. Now I want to be clear. Who has the burden? It's Tim. Mm-hmm. Tim has the burden. Guess what, Tim? I can assert all I want, because that's how debates work. If it's not my burden, I can question beg my own view. Yes, I can. Just like a courtroom. The defense attorney, he may know that his client is completely guilty of that murder. Okay? Especially if the client confessed it to him. but he can assume his client is guilty or is innocent in court, right? He doesn't need to prove the client innocent. It's the prosecutor that needs to prove the client guilty, right? So I can assert that, yes, these views are innocent. Here's an alternative view. Deal with it. And then he's like, yeah, I haven't really shown, I've dealt with them. Where? Where have you taken them into account? He needs to kind of be a little bit more specific here. Okay, so yes, he says it as if it's a bad thing. So yes, keep asserting, but it's not. He forgets that he has the burden. Okay, I hate this burden shifting here. Personally, I think a lot of incompatibilists do this. But anytime, or any people who say that anytime you make a claim, you need to back it up, that's ridiculous. No, they don't even do that in court. Okay, no, it's whoever has the burden at the time. Okay, so that's the dialectical context. Let's see if we can find any good ones in here. Some really, really great ones. He does say, I basically say the same thing, does not require categorical access. And then he just says, he explains why the conditional opportunity fails. And if he says, if you read the article above with the epistemic axis in mind, you will see that's going to leave you not with a counterpunch, but the roundhouse kick to the face. Well, that's great. And then we'll get back to the steel man as we close. But no, it doesn't, because you have the burden to show why exactly their conditions for epistemic access actually fails. And you cannot do it by already assuming the fact that determinism rules it out. Because what he's going to respond is, oh, determinism, if all things are determined, that means God has determined even the epistemic access in your mind. The reasons that you respond to. He determines the conditions. Well, newsflash, he determines the conditions for you too, underneath Molinism. But secondly, so what? Why is that? Why does that matter? Why does it matter if God determines my conditional access? Why does it matter if God determines my epistemic access? As long as I'm aware of the reasons, I'm justified. Why? Because that's all that's necessary for justification. Okay, if I am aware, and that's all that's sufficient really for justification, not just necessary, but sufficient. If I'm aware of the reasons, regardless of whether or not I'm determined, that means I can have justification, justified true belief. It may not be true belief, sure, but then you just strengthen the justification condition. But then I would say an indeterminist like him would still have the same problem. He's not aware of all of the evidence, right? I almost think he's trying to say is that you can't evaluate what belief is true, false, better, the best, worst, and so forth. That's what he's really trying to hammer home. You feel that? What he's really trying to hammer home is that if determinism is true, you can't determine in and of yourself what is true, false, better, worse, best form of belief. Sure. You can't control that. And I just think it's equivocating on all these sorts of things. I have no external, but I can have internal. I don't have regulative control over it, but I have guidance control. And these are all terms in the philosophical literature that I don't need to get into. These are all terms in the philosophical literature that Stratton, should know about. Okay? And so to me, when he says attack a steel man instead, it's annoying. I'm going to get back to the steel man thing, but it's ridiculous. Okay. I say this. What I've been saying for a while now. The epistemic access, the conditional access, all that stuff is compatible with determinism. But obviously, EJOs, the categorical access, that is incompatible with determinism. I agree. I say that's true. But it doesn't matter. It's what is necessary for it, right? So what does he say, Derek?
No, it's not. If Loki causally determines exactly how you judge and evaluate all propositions, then you stand in no epistemic position to know if your evaluative judgments are any good or true. Indeed, as I have explained in the OP article, if exhaustive divine determinism is true, then the same deity who initially causally determined you to judge incorrectly is also the same deity causally determining your evaluations upon your former causally determined and false judgments.
It's kind of muddy there, but I get what he's saying. It's, again, the same thing that he's basically been saying all along. But Loki, he's saying Loki because in the article, if you read it, he compares the Calvinist God to the God of deception with Loki. Okay, or he's done that at least before in the past. So if Loki, the God of deception, causally determines exactly how you judge and evaluate all propositions, which underneath I would say consistent Calvinism, he does. Okay, the determining mechanism is different than other determining mechanisms, but then you stand in no epistemic position to know. False. I stand in no epistemic external position to know. But I do and am aware of reasons. And if I'm aware of the reasons, I can be justified. Okay, it's just false. What he said, it's just false because he doesn't understand the differences between externalism and internalism. So everything afterwards is just ridiculous. Now, he wants to say that's basically like asking fact checkers to see if CNN is reliable and then realizing that the fact checkers are employed by CNN. And then he says, quoting William Lane Craig, a sense of vertigo sets in. So this idea, once you realize everything is determined, even the thought of thinking that everything is determined and the next thought that's about to come out of my mouth, the click of my tongue and so forth is all determined, you have this vertigo effect. I don't feel a vertigo effect. Do you feel a vertigo effect, Derek?
I'm not very dizzy.
I'm not feeling dizzy. Maybe it's the lights. It's definitely not the determinism. Okay, personally. And again, Craig is just asserting the fact that they have no epistemic access. Yeah, they have no external access. I would submit, and I do agree somewhere, I'm not exactly sure where, but I do agree that externalism, which is the location of justification, of how we know things to be justified and true, how we come to our beliefs and so forth, something like that. Externalism and determinism, he may have a point. If you mix externalism with determinism, you may have a point here. Stratton does. So I think we should reject externalism as the location of justification, because that truly does mean that everything, like you're not even aware of the reasons. You can't even possibly be aware of the reasons at all. Like the reasons just, you literally are just completely passive. Okay? And so in that sense, I would agree with Stratton. But think our lucky stars, that's not the only sense of justification or the only location of justification available to the Calvinist. If internalism is compatible with justification, and compatibilism in general, then a compatibilist like me can assume internalism and still be justified. And that completely wipes away his whole case. That God, again, determines through us and my agency along with my reasons so that I can be justified in the said evidence. If the evidence were different, then my reasons would be different and so forth. Okay? So he says it is the latter that they argue is necessary for deliberation. Or I say that. So I say for deliberations to be rationally and epistemically settled in the mind for the agent. And you don't have to read this, but he basically says that's great. He agrees if it's non-causally determined thinking. But if Ed is true, all things are causally determined. This includes how things are settled. Great. Where's the punch? Yep. So, you know what doesn't follow? That in order to deliberate, I need access to those alternatives. He never even mentioned that part, but that's his whole thesis. That's his conclusion. So yes, he's basically just retorting the definition of determinism here. So thanks. Makes no quibble off my back. He basically says there's no one drinking poison here because I say if you don't like the epistemic case, then take Bignon's case as well. He's like, my case needs to be dealt with. Okay, your case has been dealt with. You don't need alternatives in order to deliberate. It's been dealt with by Nelkin, Hairboom, Caruso, Bignon. It's been dealt with already. Your whole case can be boiled down, Stratton, into one thing. Deliberation entails liberation. That's premise 3 of his deliberation and liberation argument. It goes rationality entails deliberation. Deliberation entails, premise 2 entails liberation. And then his conclusion is rationality entails liberation. In order to be rational, you have to have libertarian freedom, which means alternative possibilities for him. Okay? And I'm saying, great. If I have one instance where you can deliberate, one alternative where you can deliberate and access is not needed, and that means categorical access, the indeterminism, is no longer a viable thesis. It's no longer necessary. It's superfluous, actually. I think it's sufficient. I think you can have libertarian freedom. If we had libertarian freedom, sure, we could obviously deliberate. But again, it's not necessary for it. I think what's necessary is this, and he needs to deal with their case. My case needs to be dealt with. Your burden is to show that your case actually already has dealt with them. You haven't, so. And then he said, I came up with this particular case after reading Caruso. Please, it's just comical at this point. Be serious. No. Unless I see a journal article with him actually quoting Caruso and detailing exactly where Caruso gets it wrong. I hope it's good. I want it to be good, but we'll see. The same thing with the burden. I don't need to go into that. I say it's his burden. He's like, what the heck? It's exactly what I did. I proved it. No, you haven't. You haven't shown why Bignon is wrong. All you've assumed is, hey, that conditional access is still determinism. So, surprise, determinism means determinism. It doesn't matter. You still need to show me why the categorical, which is necessary in his case, is in fact necessary for rational deliberation. He has not shown that. Now, he says that's your burden because I've already offered arguments. In fact, no, it's not. And this is where I don't think he understands. His argument is the argument. If I address the argument, he needs to defend the premises. Now, maybe he says he does defend the premises. Okay, great. So then if I rebut it, then it's still his burden to do a rejoinder, to come back and to still not question beg, just like during the cross-examinations in a courtroom, right? Mm-hmm. It's still his burden. My view, because it's not underneath consideration, compatibilism is innocent until proven guilty. I'm saying it hasn't been proven guilty, deliberation compatibilism, so you need to show what makes it guilty. Now he's saying it's your burden because I've already offered evidence or arguments and thought experience. Great, and I'm saying those fail because you haven't actually shown the necessity of alternative possibilities being necessary for deliberation. So no, burden's still on him. Mm-hmm. I say God determines through reason, and then this, I want you to read this. Okay, I say I can still give an answer though. God determines through our reason in order to access evidence. Okay, so God's determined, and I've been saying this all along, right? God determines through our reason in order to access evidence. What does he say, Derek?
He says, boom. That's a nice meme right there. It is now clear that you do not grasp my argument, Colton. I'm beginning to wonder if a deity of deception is causally determining you to not grasp my argument, and also causally determining you to think you do grasp it. One can reason properly or improperly. I do not deny that people do not use reason. What I am saying is that on exhaustive divine determinism, all people are causally determined to reason improperly on certain occasions, which then leads to happy affirmations of false beliefs, which we cannot be otherwise if EDD is true.
This right here is just a definition of determinism. So what he did was, I do not deny that people do not use reason. What I'm saying is on ed, people are determined. Even their thoughts are determined. Yeah. So? Again, it's like, what? So?
You need to show me why that's an issue. And then he's like, it's an issue because you have no categorical access to these alternatives. Why does that matter? Why do I need categorical access? Because if you don't have categorical access, you would be determined. Or if you're determined, you have no categorical access. Again, why does that matter? That's a definition of determinism. Do you see what I'm doing here? It's called a circle. It's called a circle. He's reasoning in a circle over and over and over again. He's not going out of the argument and actually supporting it independently. He's just depending upon his premises and just relying upon those in order to make his case. It's called question begging, is what it's called. Okay? Mm-hmm. It's just ridiculous. And the audacity for him personally, and I love the brother, but for him to say that I do not grasp his argument. I want him to clearly state then, if he watches this video, which he probably won't, I want him to clearly state that this is exactly what I get wrong. I may be simplifying his argument, but that does not mean I'm strawmanning it. And this is, you read the actual post, and we're not going to get to all of the thread, but a lot of it was just that he wants me to steelman his argument, right? And he's helping me, trying to encourage me to steelman his argument and whatnot, and accusing me of strawmanning it. But here's the rub. Like I said, I'm Stratton's biggest fan, right? I've spent the last year on his stuff. I may be simplifying it, yes. And maybe simplifying it even more so because it was Facebook, sure. But that cannot be a charge of fabricating one's view. I'm not fabricating his view. He is a deliberation incompatibilist. And just because I don't understand the fact that determinism is determinism, which I do, doesn't make his argument any more on top or any more solid. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, and so this again, you start to see, I say evidence is key, because if evidence were different based on the conditional, then our reasons would be different. That's why I like determinism, because for me, evidence dictates our reasons. That's what I say, right? Evidence is the thing that actually dictates. If the evidence were different, then I would believe for that evidence. God can determine, and we'll get into this in a little bit, for me to believe in different things based on the evidence that's available to me at that time. Conditional evidence. Okay. He says exactly how one evaluates and judges said evidence, however, is another story. Why? That is the story. What do you read? That's what we want to say. Okay. For you, it may be another story, but for compatibilists, it is the story. Because how one evaluates and judges said evidence, the determining mechanism, how it actually governs inside the agent, is important. It is pertinent to the rational responsibility of the agent. If it's determined in a different way, then perhaps we wouldn't be rationally responsible. And we saw that with Harley Quinn and the Joker. If the determining mechanism overrode the agency, then yes, she's not responsible. But if it goes through the agency, it is possible and plausible. All compatibilists say that she is responsible. And that's what I'm saying here. Depending upon the mechanism, the normal use of determinism, the determining mechanism in the agent, we follow the evidence. The how we evaluate does matter. And he's saying it doesn't. And then he says to miss it will lead to attacks of strawman. I don't really know what he means by the key point of my case here, but he says encourage you to make steelman arguments. And I do. I'm not against steelmanning. I don't do it here, but I'm not against steelmanning. In fact, I've steelmanned his arguments many times in my 160-page book. I steelman him. I'm very charitable. All I think that's necessary for steelmanning is to be quoting the individual, charitably interpret them, and then give your response.
Well, don't you think, Colton,
go for it.
Just to jump in, so basically he's trying to devalue what a compatibilist, like you just said, the how is extremely important. But his whole thing is, well, we're not going to deal with that because it's not important for his view. So he's just hitting around the edges, and he's not really dealing with the actual how.
If that is the interpretation, again, I said this.
Sure.
Yeah, this is kind of fuzzy, but if that is the interpretation, which I mean, it looks like it kind of is, then yeah, that he's doing exactly that, which is question begging. It's literally begging the question against compatibilists. So at that point, he said he would love to make it a Steelman. Stay tuned, Stratton. Stay tuned. Here I say that yes, externalism mixed with ed is awful. He says awesome. That's great. He also says that it's just assertions, but it's not my burden. So I can assert all I want. Show me why that's wrong. And if he says, oh, because it fails on ed, so why does that matter? Especially if alternatives aren't necessary, which Bignon's view shows it's not necessary. So you can stomp your foot all you want and assert otherwise. No, they've argued otherwise. I'm not arguing. I'm just getting, hey, smarter people than me have given these things. How about you actually interact with it for a change?
Mm-hmm.
It's clear to those who are not committed to ed. I'm not committed to ed, by the way. I'm committed to the gospel in Christ, and I think the best systematic is determinism. So I'm not oddly, weirdly committed to like this cult of ed or something, but your beliefs and evaluation judgments are aimed at exactly what God determines you to hit. And this is what I'm saying. Our will comes from God. It's not aimed at God's will. So he wants to say that everything is aimed at God's will. Sure. I would rather look at it like a bow and arrow. So like the archer is God. Okay. Our will is the arrow. Right? Okay. Our will is the arrow. And yes, wherever the archer, he's an expert archer, wherever the archer lets go of our will, it will hit. Okay, it will hit a certain bullseye, and that bullseye is what I call the evidence. Okay, so it's not the case. It's not the case that our will is aimed at God's will, or our reasons or evidence is aimed at God's will. Our beliefs and evaluations are aimed at God's will. No, it's aimed at evidence. It's not aimed at the archer, okay, unless the archer is trying to shoot himself or something. But it's not aimed at that. It's aimed at something that God fires at, and I say it's from the evidence. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You're correct. God never misses, which is amazing. I'm talking, David Paulman gave me the idea of internalism. We don't need to get into that. I already said that. Okay. So I said, why not? Because why I said, what did I say? I can't remember what I said, but because I don't have metaphysical categorical options available, like why is that the case, or what does he say? Oh, he says this. Okay, sorry. He says this. If this is the case, then you cannot know if you should have evaluated otherwise. And I say, why not? Because I don't have metaphysical categorical options. And he says, yep, which means yes, which means great. So that means if you have an alternative view that negates those alternatives as being necessary, then modus tollens, I can know. Right? Right. Which is exactly what I'm trying to argue, and he's just missing the whole thing. Okay? And he just goes on this rant of occasionally determines you to affirm false beliefs and you have no actual access. Yeah. Yep. I have no categorical access. Why is that necessary? Better true beliefs. You cannot access EGOs. Not categorically, you're absolutely correct. Over false ones. Why do I need to have regulative control over options? Why can't I just have guidance control of my options? Right? There's a slight distinction there. I don't need regulative control over true beliefs over false ones. I just need guidance control of my beliefs, of true ones, of false ones. A whole book by Mark Raviza and John Martin Fisher called Responsibility and Control show this to be the case. He thinks that he has somehow defeated that guidance control, which I'll respond into my reply to him, but not here. Okay, I ask, okay, why does this matter? He says, yep. Great. You see that? Yep. I ask, okay, why does these matter? And this is great, Derek. This is probably where I'll end, because it's pretty much the same thing over and over again. I want the full context. You ready? I asked, why does the metaphysical category, why does it matter if I know something? He's like, I asked, why not? Why can't I actually evaluate and judge even though I'm determined? And I ask, kind of rhetorically, because I don't have metaphysical categorical options. And then he says, yep. I say, why does that matter? Why does it matter if I have categorical options? Basically saying, why is it necessary? Because rational agents do not possess the opportunity to infer better or true beliefs over false ones. Literally the exact same thing. Because
say that one more time, say it one more time, because you said do not possess. I just want to make sure we have the.
Oh, sorry, possess. Yeah.
It's okay.
So he says, if this is the case, then you cannot know. I say, why not? Why can't I know? Because I don't have metaphysical categorical options at that time. He says, yep. I say, why does it matter? He says, because rational agents do possess opportunity. But that's the very question we are arguing. How do you know that they possess opportunity? How do you know that they possess categorical access to those alternatives? I ask, how do you know? Because I don't have them. He says, yes, you don't know because you don't have them. Why does it matter? Because you need them. Do you see what he just did there? It's called begging the question.
Begging the
that's
question.
what it
Perfect.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can't. When I saw this, it was, to me, it was pack it up, boys, because it was, to me, like, it's done. He can't get out of this idea of you don't have the opportunity to infer better and true beliefs. Why does that matter? Because you don't have the opportunity to infer better and true beliefs. And then he wants to say that this is usually easy for people to understand. It's not rocket science. It's philosophy. And I'm not going to accept a premise if you're arguing in circles. I'm just not. Okay? So he just continues to say the same thing, which is even more hilarious when he says the most essential thing about his case is not the categorical ability. No. It is. Now, he says the most vital point is that the rational agent's thoughts cannot be causally determined by non-rational things or a deceptive determiner. Okay, so why does that matter? I mean, I agree that if you're determined, you cannot be the source. That's what he's saying, that you cannot be the source. And yeah, I agree that if you're determined like that, you can't be the source. The source would come back to God in some sense, yes. But again, why does that sourcehood matter for responsibility? And he doesn't tell me. And then the claim, please tell the world and the rational agents, everyone that's listening, choose better beliefs over false ones. Please tell the world that rational agents cannot choose better beliefs over false ones. Yep. World, you cannot choose categorical better beliefs. Or you cannot categorically choose better beliefs over false ones. I did it. You cannot categorically choose better beliefs over false ones because I believe determinism to be true. And he's just equivocating here. He says it's not the most important thing, but why does he equivocate then on the thing? He says abductive reasoning, which is basically intuition, and at the end of the day, he's going to probably just punt to intuition because he already agreed on the rejoinder to Bignon that libertarian freedom is intuitive and properly basic to him. So I guess that packs it up. It's properly basic, so I can't really argue there. I'm being sarcastic, obviously. Yeah. But everything else is pretty much the same thing. So yeah, and then we get a little bit more into his premises, but I think that pretty much summarizes the main thing. This is the last thing I want to go over, and then we'll pack it up. Sounds good? Sounds good. He did give me a challenge, right? But everything I said is pretty much the same thing, just ad nauseum, keep going back, talking over each other. He says, challenge, make my case stronger than I have. He wants me to steel man his arguments. And first of all, okay, make my case stronger than you have. I think that would be great, But then again, I've actually seen some philosophers actually try to steel man an argument. And guess what the original philosopher, the original author responded to? You're straw manning. So, I mean, like, I'm
No
not going to go
whatsoever.
off. Yeah. So in order to make the case stronger than he has, that means I would have to argue for something like libertarian freedom and perhaps go past what he has argued in order to make it stronger. And that's just not my job. It's just not my job to make his case stronger than it is. It is my job as a steel man to make a steel man, as an interlocutor, to charitably interpret him, to quote him extensively. In my book or in my reply, I do that a lot. I quote him, block quotes extensively, trying to decipher which is the best interpretation. He could be saying this, he could be saying that. And so if he's saying this, this is what it means. If he's saying that, that's what it means. But if he's saying this, which I think this is probably the best interpretation, well, then this is where he's wrong. And if he's saying this, given the best interpretation, this is where he's wrong, or maybe right. That to me is a steel man. That is being a good interlocutor, right? I almost think he's wanting me to make a syllogistic argument for the free thinking argument. I think the argument's crap, so why would I? So you feeling me? Like, why would I do that? Why would I actually defend them? Now, when he's saying defend them, I think what he means is give an argument and then argue it as if you are giving it. And that to me is just quoting the same argument that he's given and then summarizing the argument. This is what they think and this is what they would defend it and how they would defend it, which I do in my reply. And then I do seek to destroy it. Okay. And okay, given this interpretation, this is false. Apparently it still hasn't gotten his attention though. So maybe when I finish my whole reply, it will get his attention. Again, maybe he'll sign it.
Well, he's, we haven't formally done it, but he's welcome to come on this show at any time and talk with you and have a cordial conversation. And I think it'd be really good if you both were able to go, point by point or back and forth.
I would love that. I doubt
open invitation.
You'll ever do that, but awesome. So I'm done. So I'm going to go back, but like I said, everything else is pretty much just everything I said is just the same thing over and over and over again. So I'm not going to go through all of it. And it's already been a lot of stuff. So
where do you, as we wrap up, where do you go from here? I mean, obviously you're doing when do you think that's going to be out, by the way? Or do you even have a...
I wanted it to be over the summer, but it's not going to happen. I'll say this. It's 160 pages so far, and I haven't even made it past definitions.
Whoa.
Seriously.
Okay.
I said this on our last reply to my last reply on Stratton on that thread. I love the brother, but I think honestly he has different definitions of what compatibilism is and determinism is and all that kind of stuff. And so it's going to make this conversation a lot more difficult because we're talking past each other. And that's why I want to speak to him personally online. Because then if I'm saying something that he doesn't agree with, then he can just interrupt me right away, right? Sure. And say, no, that's not what it is. Instead of this text back and forth, it's just ridiculous. I personally don't like that, but I'm writing about it. I don't know when it's going to come out. I'll probably be done with the definitions by the end of the summer. That will probably end up being 170 pages, probably 180 at most, I think, but 170 pages probably. And then I'm planning on doing some audio formats of the sections with Tyler Vela, which is part of the Free Thinking podcast. Mm-hmm. So we'll probably
try to get him on tonight, but he was traveling, so maybe next time.
What a bum. Yeah, so that's what's next. Maybe Stratton will respond to this. I highly doubt it. Even if he did, I probably wouldn't do a rejoinder back unless it's really bad. But I love the guy. I love the gospel. And I'm just infuriated when people just take our view, our view of regeneration, of compatibilism, something that's so precious to us, because of how we were regenerated, Derek?
Yeah.
And then just smash it and not even smash it correctly. That to me is disgusting, and I don't want that to happen. So that's why I wanted to do this response. But we'll probably do more Stratton responses later. So.
Sure. Well, I think it's great. Do you have any last? I know a lot of this was kind of heady. I always tell people I like to hang out with smart people, so I just sit here and learn from guys like you. But for the the rank and file people that maybe it was a little heady, maybe whatever. I mean, what do you suggest for them in a quick couple sentences? I mean, just study and read the books and if they're interested in it, or what do you suggest?
Definitely buy Stratton's book. I'm going to publicize it for him, plug it for him. Buy it. It's called Internalism. Yeah, it's a good book. I would rate it probably 2 out of 5, personally. But these are some good parts in there. But when it comes to the philosophy, and this is what I would say to all the laymen: you need to understand the arguments. You need to understand both sides. I don't think you can simply just attack the other side without quoting like people from the other side, what they actually believe. You can't just assume what they would believe is true, and then this is how. And we saw that in his video today. And we also saw that he just assumed that if determinism was exhaustive, it doesn't matter about the condition. Somehow erases the epistemic access, as if that's even what it was about. Who cares if God determines our access, epistemic access to certain things? Who cares if God determines it? That's not the debate. The debate is what is necessary for these certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So read Bignon's book, read Stratton's book, go through the videos, watch my video with you, right? The nature of free will.
Yep. And it's important because even the lay people, we're in a lot of these groups together in Facebook, social media, information age. They often do this where they compare your God is like in the video, the Joker, and it's the worst possible thing. And if people don't understand even the base, like what are they really saying? Because they're not even representing the position properly. Not even close.
It's just not helpful. I don't, there's times actually on that same thread as we close, you even commented on the same thread, but on the same thread, Stratton wants to argue that if you are committed to exhaustive divine determinism, you're basically worshiping idolatry. You're worshiping God, and you're being idolatrous. You're making God to be a less than maximally great being, and if that's the case, you're being idolatrous. And I'm saying that in light of the evidence that we have, we're not committing idolatry. Like he wants to say stuff like that, and it's just not helpful, like in the debates. And so we see that all amongst these, I guess, laymen or whatever. And it just needs to cut it out. We need to deal with the arguments. We need to deal with the compatibilism, the determinism, what it actually means. And we can't let our presuppositions, just because it's there, we can't let our presuppositions kind of cut it off.
And in closing here, what's the word you had? Ecclesiodicy. When they have those arguments, they can't answer so many questions. Like atheists raise questions about the Old Testament where, God destroys man, women, and children, all this stuff. He can't use that same vernacular and bring it over and be consistent with everything he's saying, because it's almost, I call it the first world arguments. And a lot of people in the first world, oh yeah, cool, it's the ivory tower stuff, but there's more to it, right? There's more depth there that needs to be discussed and figured out. So So anyway, guys, we're almost at 2 hours. I think we are done. Thank you so much, Colton, for being on here. Great information. I was taking some notes. It's I'm always learning with guys like you. So until next time, folks, have a great evening. Take care.